My name is Leo Maxwell, and for the better part of 2 decades, my life has been measured in blueprints and concrete, in the precise angle of a steel beam, and the quiet satisfaction of a building taking its rightful place against the city skyline. At 48, I was the senior project architect at Cresswell and Associates, a title that felt less like a job and more like an identity. I hadn't just worked here. I had poured my life into its foundations. The award-winning museum wing that redefined the city's cultural district, the sprawling tech campus that everyone said was impossible to build on a floodplain, the painstaking restoration of the old Grand Avenue Theater. Those weren't just firm projects, they were my projects. I was the one who wrestled old Robert Cresswell's ambitious sketches into functional, breathtaking reality. When clients had a crisis, they called me. When a project was on the line, I was the one on site at 3 a.m. My reputation and the firm's were inextricably linked. The firm was my second home, and Robert Cresswell, a titan of Philadelphia architecture now in his late 70s, had been my mentor. He saw me as a younger version of himself, a pragmatist with the soul of an artist. He'd hired me straight out of Penn, and for 20 years we'd had an understanding, a bond forged in the crucible of impossible deadlines and complex designs. For the past 5 years, the succession plan had been a quiet certainty. When he finally retired, I would be made a full partner, the steady hand that would guide his legacy into the future. This firm needs your integrity, Leo. He'd told me more than once over a glass of whiskey after a hard-won contract. It's your ship to steer when I'm gone. The iceberg struck on a bright Tuesday morning. Robert had called a firm-wide meeting, a rarity that sent a low hum of speculation through the drafting bays. He stood before us in the main conference room, looking frail, his powerful voice softened by age. He spoke of his pride, his life's work, and then he delivered the blow. He wasn't passing the torch. He was extinguishing it. He had sold the firm. The buyer was Artifacts Group, a global development monolith based out of Dubai, known for its portfolio of glossy, hyper-modern towers that all looked vaguely the same. They bought regional firms with solid reputations, stripped them for their assets and client lists, and rebranded them under their corporate umbrella. The air in the room grew heavy with the weight of unspoken anxieties. Our small, bespoke family was being swallowed by a corporate giant. Two men, in severe, dark suits, representatives from Artifacts, stepped forward. They spoke in the bloodless, smooth language of international business, using words like synergy, optimization, and a new global vision. Then, they introduced the man who would be the new face of what was now to be called Artifacts Cresswell Philadelphia. His name was Julian Croft. He couldn't have been older than 32. He had the sharp, trendy look of someone who spends more time being photographed for design blogs than reviewing construction documents. I knew his work, of course. He was a rising star, famous for conceptual, gravity-defying designs that were celebrated in the abstract but were, in practice, logistical and budgetary nightmares. He was an architect of the theoretical, a creator of beautiful, unbuildable fantasies. We're incredibly excited to have Julian's visionary talent leading our Philadelphia studio, one of the suits announced. He will bring a necessary disruptive energy to the solid foundation Mr. Cresswell has built. Disruptive energy. The phrase felt like a declaration of war against everything I stood for. After the jarring applause died down, Robert pulled me aside. He couldn't quite meet my eye. Leo, I know this is a lot to take in, he said, his voice laced with an unfamiliar note of apology. Their offer, it was generational. For my family. They know how crucial you are. Your role is completely secure. Lake, my role? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. What exactly is my role now, Robert? Julian Croft is the new design principal. They need you, Leo, he said, a desperate edge to his voice. They need you to be his senior advisor, to provide your technical oversight, to manage the client relationships, to help him execute his vision. The meaning was as clear as a perfectly rendered schematic. I was being demoted to the world's most experienced, overqualified assistant. My 2 decades of work, my intimate knowledge of every client and every project, were now to be placed in service of a wonderkind who probably couldn't even read a proper structural analysis. I was no longer the heir. I was the butler, tasked with making sure the new lord of the manor didn't burn the house down. Later that afternoon, Julian Croft sauntered over to my desk. He gestured at the intricate blueprints for the new biomedical research facility. I was deep into a project I had personally nurtured from a napkin sketch to near-full construction documents. Maxwell, right? He said, not waiting for an answer. Solid work here. Very functional. He tapped a finger on the meticulously planned HVAC system. I'm thinking we can open up this whole facade. A glass curtain wall. Something iconic. Let's make a statement. We'll connect tomorrow to discuss my preliminary thoughts. He strode away, leaving a trail of expensive cologne in his wake. He hadn't asked about the client's stringent environmental control requirements, the budget I had fought for months to maintain, or the complex load-bearing structure I had designed to make the whole thing possible. He saw my work not as a solution, but as a canvas for his own ego. I looked down at my blueprints, at the countless hours of careful thought and hard-won experience represented in those lines. They suddenly felt like a relic. The ship I was meant to steer had been taken over by a new captain, one who cared only for the look of the sails and had no idea how to navigate the sea. And in his dismissive, self-assured smile, I saw the blueprint for my own betrayal. The weeks following the acquisition were an exercise in slow, suffocating erosion. The soul of Cresswell and Associates was being systematically replaced. The familiar, collaborative hum of our studio was supplanted by the sterile silence of a corporate outpost. Memos from Artifex Group's global headquarters appeared in our inboxes daily, filled with new acronyms, mandatory workflow software, and cheerful, soulless pronouncements about our new global family. The oak conference table where Robert Cresswell and I had once unrolled blueprints with clients was now used for mandatory HR seminars on synergistic branding. It felt like a hostile occupation, conducted with polite smiles and expensive suits. Julian Croft, the new design principal, moved through the office with the unshakable confidence of a conquering hero. He didn't integrate, he presided. He initiated a series of vision meetings where he spoke eloquently about disrupting the architectural paradigm and creating narrative-driven spatial experiences. He was charismatic, and the younger staff, who had never known the old firm, were captivated by him. My senior colleagues and I, however, exchanged looks of weary disbelief. We were builders, engineers, problem solvers. We spoke the language of physics, building codes, and client budgets. Julian spoke a different language, entirely the abstract, jargon-laden dialect of academic theory and design magazines. My new role as his senior technical advisor quickly became clear. I was to be his fact-checker, his reality anchor. I was the person who had to translate his grand, impractical pronouncements into something that wouldn't collapse under its own weight or bankrupt the client. Our interactions were a tense, frustrating dance. He would sketch a wild, cantilevered roof, and I would be the one to gently point out that the necessary structural steel would cost more than the entire budget for the building. He would propose an exotic, unproven cladding material he'd seen in a Swiss design journal, and I would be the one to explain that it would never pass Philadelphia's stringent fire codes. He didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a naysayer, a tether to the boring, predictable past he was here to transcend. The inevitable collision came, as I knew it would, over the biomedical research facility. It was my project, the culmination of years of work. I had a deep, trusting relationship with the client, a hospital consortium that valued precision, safety, and long-term functionality above all else. Julian saw it as his first opportunity to put his iconic stamp on the city. He called a design review meeting with the new corporate managers from Artifex and a few key members of my project team. He began with a slick presentation, displaying a series of stunningly beautiful, photorealistic renderings of the building. My meticulously planned, high-performance facade had been replaced by his vision, a vast, uninterrupted curtain wall of floor-to-ceiling glass. "We need to move beyond the utilitarian," Julian announced, gesturing to the rendering with a flourish. "This building isn't just a laboratory, it's a statement. It's about transparency, about the open exchange of ideas. A glass facade creates a beacon of scientific progress." The corporate managers nodded in approval, seduced by the glossy image and the confident buzzwords. I waited, my hands folded on the table. When he finished, one of the managers turned to me. "Leo, what are your thoughts on the technical feasibility?" I took a breath, keeping my voice calm and measured. "The rendering is beautiful, Julian," I began, a professional courtesy that felt like a lie. "However, a full glass curtain wall presents several insurmountable challenges for this specific application. First, the client's research involves highly light-sensitive cellular cultures and imaging equipment. Uncontrolled light exposure would invalidate years of research. We had designed a complex system of recessed windows and automated louvers to provide precise, controllable light. I continued, my voice steady. Second, the thermal load. A biomedical facility like this has enormous HVAC requirements to maintain sterile, climate-controlled environments. A glass facade, even with the best coatings, would create a massive greenhouse effect. The energy cost to cool the building would be astronomical, easily tripling the client's projected operating budget. Finally, I said, there is the matter of security and vibration. This is a secure facility. A glass wall is a security liability. Furthermore, the labs on the upper floors use electron microscopes that are sensitive to microvibrations. The facade I designed incorporated specific materials to dampen external vibrations from wind and traffic. A glass wall cannot do that. I had laid out a series of indisputable, critical facts. I expected a serious discussion. Instead, Julian smiled a tight, condescending smile. Leo, thank you for that. Very practical analysis, he said. But I think you're thinking like an engineer, not a visionary. These aren't problems, they're design challenges. We can use fritted glass, integrated smart films, new dampening technologies. We can find solutions. We can't let old ways of thinking stifle innovation. The managers seized on his word. Exactly, one of them said, looking at me as if I were a stubborn child. We need to be innovative. Find a way to make it work, Leo. That's what we pay you for. I was speechless. My expertise, my deep understanding of the client's needs, my responsibility to the project's budget and function it, had all been dismissed as old ways of thinking. I was being told to defy the laws of physics and the explicit requirements of the client simply to accommodate the ego of a man with a pretty picture. That evening, I went home feeling a profound sense of disillusionment. I called my son Sam, who was in his second year of a civil engineering program at Carnegie Mellon. I told him about my day, about the battle over the glass facade. He was quiet for a moment. So, he said finally, this new guy wants to build something that looks cool, even if it doesn't work for the people who have to use it and pay for it? That's a pretty good summary, I admitted, a bitter taste in my mouth. That's not architecture, Dad, Sam said, his voice filled with the clear, uncomplicated certainty of youth. That's just sculpture. You always taught me that good design solves problems. It doesn't create them. His words hit me harder than any corporate memo. He was right. I had spent my career as a problem solver, a builder. But my new job was to enable a fantasist. I was being asked to compromise my professional ethics, to betray the trust of my clients, all in service of a vision I knew to be a hollow facade. The decision crystallized in that moment. I could not be a party to this. I could not stand by and watch 2 decades of my work, and the firm's hard-won reputation, be dismantled by arrogance and incompetence. Staying at Artifex Cresswell meant a slow professional death, a descent into becoming a glorified draftsman for a man I did not respect. I hung up the phone and walked over to my home office. I sat down at my desk, the conversation with my son replaying in my mind. For the first time in weeks, the anger and frustration receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Robert Cresswell had been wrong. This wasn't my ship to steer anymore. It was time to build my own. I turned on my computer, but instead of opening the project files for the biomedical facility, I created a new, blank document. I typed a single word at the top. Plan. I was done playing defense. It was time to design my own future. My life split into 2 parallel realities, governed by 2 different sets of blueprints. By day, I was the consummate professional at Artifex Cresswell. I attended Julian's ideation sessions, offering carefully measured, technical feedback that was consistently ignored. I maintained a facade of polite compliance, a mask of corporate loyalty. My colleagues saw a man who was perhaps quietly unhappy, but ultimately falling in line. Management saw their senior technical advisor doing his job. No one saw the strategist who was meticulously planning a revolution in the quiet of his own home office. The document I had titled Plan grew, from a single word into a complex, multi-layered strategy. But I knew from the start that this couldn't be a solo endeavor. A one-man architectural firm is a desperate uphill battle. To succeed, to truly offer a viable alternative to the hollow shell of my old company, I needed a team. More than that, I needed a cadre, a core group of trusted professionals who shared my values and my disillusionment. My first targets were the 2 people in the firm whose competence I respected most, and who I knew were just as appalled by the new regime as I was. The first was Sarah Chen, our lead structural engineer. She was a brilliant, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s, with a mind like a steel trap and zero tolerance for artistic fantasies that defied the laws of physics. She had worked with me on nearly every major project for the past 15 years. She viewed Julian's designs with the quiet, simmering contempt of a master chess player watching a child knock over the pieces. The second was David Miller, our senior business manager. David was the one who knew the contracts inside and out. the one who had nurtured the financial side of our client relationships. He was a pragmatist, a man who understood that our firm's success was built on decades of trust, not on flashy renderings. He was already fielding nervous calls from long-term clients who were getting spooked by Julian's radical new proposals. I invited them both for a drink, choosing a quiet, old bar downtown, far from the usual after-work spots frequented by our colleagues. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and whiskey, a comforting antidote to the sterile, perfumed atmosphere of our new office. I didn't beat around the bush. After some initial small talk, I laid it out. "I can't do it anymore," I said, my voice low. "I can't stand by and watch Julian Croft dismantle everything we've built. I can't put my name on designs that are professionally irresponsible and a betrayal of our client's trust." Sarah swirled the ice in her glass, her expression grim. "The biomedical facade," she said. "It wasn't a question. He's asking me to sign off on a structural plan that is, to put it mildly, insane. He wants a 30-foot cantilever with no visible supports. It's not architecture, it's magic. He's going to run this firm into the ground," David added, his voice tight with frustration. He presented a preliminary budget to the hospital board that was a complete work of fiction. He's promising them the moon, and we're the ones who are going to have to explain why the rocket ship can't get off the launch pad. Our reputation for honesty is being torched. "So, what's the alternative?" Sarah asked, her sharp eyes fixed on me. "Quit and go work for one of our competitors?" "No," I said, leaning forward. "We start our own firm. The three of us. A small, focused practice built on the principles this firm used to stand for: integrity, experience, and an unwavering commitment to the client. No corporate overhead, no visionary nonsense. Just good, honest, intelligent design and execution." The silence that followed was charged with a heavy, thrilling potential. I saw a flicker of something in their eyes, not just anger at our current situation, but the spark of an idea, the possibility of an escape. "Our non-compete clauses," David began, ever the pragmatist, "are barely enforceable in this state, and you know it," I countered. "They can't prevent us from practicing our profession, and more importantly, the clients aren't a line item in an acquisition deal. Our relationships with them are personal. They are ours to lose." That was the beginning. My home office became our secret headquarters. We met on weekends and late at night, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. We were a perfect triumvirate. I focused on the design philosophy and putting together a portfolio of our collective major works. Sarah developed our engineering framework and technical capabilities, outlining how we could offer more efficient, integrated design-build solutions than our larger, more bureaucratic competitors. David built the business plan from the ground-up: financial projections, incorporation strategy, and a meticulously detailed list of potential clients, ranked by their loyalty to us versus their loyalty to the Cresswell brand. We gave our new firm a name: Vantage Collaborative. It spoke to our experience, our vantage point, and our client: focused, team-based approach. The plan was no longer a dream. It was becoming a viable, tangible entity. Back at the office, the situation with the biomedical facility continued to devolve. As instructed, I was tasked with producing a report on how to make Julian's vision work. I spent a week on it, but the report I produced was an act of malicious compliance. It was brutally, technically honest. I didn't say his idea was bad. I simply laid out, in excruciating detail, what would be required to achieve it. I presented it to Julian and two of the Artifacts managers. To support the proposed glass facade and cantilevered entrance, I explained, my tone flat and clinical, you will require a series of deep-grade steel trusses, custom fabricated, at a cost of approximately $4.2 million, which is 80% of the original budget for the entire building envelope. The specialized HVAC system required to maintain climate stability will increase long-term operating costs by an estimated 250%. Furthermore, the necessary internal dampening systems to protect the sensitive lab equipment will result in a loss of approximately 15% of the usable square footage on the upper floors. I slid the 40-page report across the table. It is, from an engineering standpoint, possible. It is, from a fiscal and functional standpoint, profoundly inadvisable. Julian's face was a mask of fury. The managers looked uncomfortable. I had done what they asked. I had made it work on paper. But in doing so, I had exposed the sheer folly of the idea in a way they couldn't ignore. I had given them the rope, and they could either hang their visionary with it or admit defeat. That night, the three of us met again at my house. We were gathered around my dining room table, which was covered in financial spreadsheets, legal documents, and preliminary sketches for our new firm's branding. David had just secured a potential line of credit from a bank, contingent on us landing our first major contract. Sarah had outlined a lean, efficient operational model. I looked at their faces, at the tired but determined set of their jaws. These were people I trusted, people I had been in the trenches with for years. We were all taking a massive risk, preparing to jump from the secure deck of a large ship into a small lifeboat of our own making. But the ship was sinking, and we all knew it. The business plan is solid, David said, tapping a final spreadsheet. The financials are tight, but they work. Sarah's operational plan is brilliant. The question is, are we ready? Sarah asked, looking at me. I looked at the detailed, actionable blueprint for Vantage Collaborative spread across my table. It was the most honest, intelligent, and exciting design I had been a part of in years. I thought of the condescending smirk on Julian's face and the dead-eyed compliance of his corporate enablers. Yes, I said, a feeling of absolute certainty settling over me. We're ready. We raised our coffee mugs in a silent toast. The decision was made. The planning was over. The next chapter was about to begin. We chose a Monday morning to execute the plan. The symbolism was deliberate. We weren't slinking away on a Friday afternoon. We were marking the beginning of a new week as the beginning of our new lives. We agreed to act in sequence, an hour apart, to maximize the administrative chaos and prevent the management from presenting a united front against us. David, as the business manager, would go first. Sarah, the head of engineering, would follow. I, as the most senior and visible member of the old guard, would be the last to fall. I sat at my desk, a strange calm settling over me. For the first time in months, I felt no anger, no resentment. I felt only the quiet, focused hum of a plan being set into motion. At 9 a.m. sharp, I saw David walk into the office of the lead artifacts manager, a man named Henderson. 10 minutes later, David walked out, his face impassive, and returned to his desk to begin quietly packing his personal effects. A ripple of confusion went through the administrative staff. At 10 a.m., Sarah did the same, entering and exiting Henderson's office with the same cool professionalism. The ripples of confusion were now turning into waves of quiet panic. At 11 a.m., it was my turn. I walked to Henderson's office, my own resignation letter in hand. He was on the phone, his face pale and tight. He waved me in impatiently, finishing his call with a clipped, "I'll have to call you back." He looked at me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Don't tell me," he said, his voice laced with dread. "You too?" I placed the letter on his desk. "Effective immediately," I said. Though I am, of course, prepared to stay for a standard 2-week transition period to ensure a smooth handover of my projects. Henderson stared at the letter as if it were a venomous snake. The carefully constructed corporate facade he wore had shattered. "This is a coordinated walkout," he hissed. "This is unprofessional. It's sabotage." "On the contrary," I replied calmly. "It is 3 senior professionals independently choosing to seek opportunities elsewhere due to a fundamental shift in the firm's philosophy. My decision is personal and based on a desire to practice architecture in a manner consistent with my professional ethics." "Your ethics?" he scoffed. "This is about the promotion. This is because we brought in Julian Croft. This is petty revenge." "This is about the biomedical facility," I said, my voice as hard and cool as steel. "It's about being instructed to endorse a design that is fiscally irresponsible and functionally unworkable. It's about being told to betray a client's trust to satisfy a new designer's ego. My ethics are perfectly intact. The question is, are the firms?" He had no answer for that. The panic in his eyes was now mingled with raw fury. "You have a non-compete clause, Maxwell," he threatened. "Artifacts Group has a legal team that will tie you up in court for years if you think you can just walk out of here and steal our clients." "I have no intention of stealing anyone," I said. "My clients are free to choose who they work with, and I'd suggest you have your legal team read my employment agreement from 2004 again. The non-compete clause is specific to joining a direct, established competitor. It says nothing about an individual starting their own practice. Robert Cresswell always believed in a man's right to build his own future." I stood up. "I'll be at my desk if you need to discuss the transition plan." I walked out, leaving him sputtering in my wake. The office was in a state of muted chaos. Julian Croft stood near his office, trying to project an aura of detached artistic indifference, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his phone. He understood what was happening. We hadn't just quit. We, the firm's entire senior operational and technical leadership, had just evaporated. The workhorse, the engineer, and the business manager, the three pillars that held up his vision, were gone. The threatening letter from Artifex's legal department arrived via courier the next day, as expected. It was full of blustering legal threats about fiduciary duty and intellectual property. David, who had anticipated this, had already retained a lawyer for our new venture. He drafted a calm, professional response that cited our legal rights and professionally refuted their claims. We sent it back and heard nothing more. They knew they had no real case. The letter was pure intimidation. The real test came on Thursday. My phone rang, and the caller ID showed the name of Dr. Annabelle Reed, the formidable chair of the board for the hospital consortium, our client for the biomedical facility. "Leo," she said, her voice sharp and direct. No time for pleasantries. "I've just had a very confusing call from a Mr. Henderson. He informed me that you, Sarah Chen, and David Miller have all resigned from the firm. Is this true?" "Yes, Dr. Reed. It is," I said. There was a long pause on the other end. "I see," she said finally. "Let me be perfectly clear. Our contract and our trust were with Cresswell and Associates, and for the last 5 years that has meant you, Sarah, and David. We have been extremely concerned about the new vision being proposed by Mr. Croft. The board was about to formally reject his facade proposal. Now, with you three gone, we have zero confidence in that firm's ability to execute this project. So, let me ask you directly, what are your plans?" This was the moment of truth. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. I would not solicit. I would simply answer her question. "Dr. Reed, my partners and I are in the process of forming a new independent firm called Vantage Collaborative," I said. "Our goal is to continue practicing architecture based on the principles of integrity, expertise, and client collaboration that we believe in." "Good," she said immediately, as if this was the answer she was waiting for. "Consider your new firm formally invited to submit a proposal to take over the project. I will inform Mr. Henderson that we are putting our contract with his firm on hold pending a review of our options. I suspect we will be exercising the termination for cause clause in our agreement, citing the loss of key personnel. Send me your proposal by the end of next week." She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, a slow wave of profound, bone-deep relief washing over me. It had worked. Our reputation, the trust we had built over decades, was our true capital. It was more valuable than Artifex's global reach or Julian's flashy renderings. That evening, the three of us met at my house. I told them about the call from Dr. Reed. David let out a whoop of joy. Sarah, ever the stoic, broke into a wide, brilliant smile. We had done it. We had jumped from the deck of the sinking ship, and the lifeboat we had built was not only floating, but we had just been given our first, life-sustaining destination. I looked at my partners, at the blueprints for our new company spread across my dining room table. We weren't just a plan anymore. We had our first client. We were a firm. Vantage Collaborative was real. The risk had been immense, but the vindication was absolute. We had our vantage point, and from here, we could finally start to build again. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of focused, purposeful activity. My official departure from Artifex Cresswell was swift and unceremonious. After I informed Henderson of Dr. Reed's invitation for us to submit a proposal, his demeanor shifted from threatening to coldly hostile. He realized he had no leverage left. Rather than have me serve out my 2 weeks, a constant professional reminder of his firm's failure, he instructed HR to process my immediate termination. It was a petty, final gesture meant to inconvenience us, but it felt like a gift. I left the building for the last time, not with bitterness, but with a profound sense of relief. Vantage Collaborative was born not in a sleek office, but at my dining room table, which became our command center. We worked from dawn until long past midnight, fueled by coffee and a thrilling sense of urgent creation. David handled the legal labyrinth of incorporation with astonishing speed. Sarah laid out our lean operational framework, setting up our software, cloud servers, and technical standards, and I focused on the most important task, winning the biomedical facility contract. Our proposal was not a glossy sales pitch. It was a testament to our philosophy. We didn't present dazzling renderings of a glass facade. Instead, we presented a solution. We returned to my original, proven design, but improved it, integrating more efficient materials and smarter systems we had researched. We laid out a phased construction plan, a realistic line-item budget, and a detailed analysis of long-term operational costs. We weren't selling a dream. We were selling competence, certainty, and a deep understanding of the client's mission. The meeting with the hospital board took place a week later. We sat across the table from Dr. Reed and her colleagues. Julian, Croft, and Henderson were also there, invited to present their own proposal in a last-ditch effort to save the contract. Julian went first. He had toned down his vision, adding some practical elements. But the core of his design was still focused on style over substance. He spoke of architectural dialogue and iconic placemaking. Then it was our turn. I was the lead presenter. I didn't speak of abstract concepts. I spoke of air exchange rates in the clean rooms, of the floor's load-bearing capacity for MRI machines, and of the importance of minimizing operational disruption to the existing hospital during construction. I spoke of creating a building that served the scientists within it, not one designed to impress architectural critics. Sarah followed with the engineering specifics, explaining how our approach would save energy and enhance safety. David presented the financials, showing not only that our plan was on budget, but that it provided better long-term value. When we finished, the difference in the room was palpable. Julian's presentation had been a solo performance. Ours was a coordinated symphony. The board didn't take long to decide. The next day, Dr. Reed called me. "Leo," she said, her voice warm with professionalism. "The board has voted unanimously. The contract is awarded to Vantage Collaborative. We look forward to working with you to get this building built right." That victory was more than a contract. It was a validation. It sent a powerful message through the city's design and construction community. A reputation built on trust and competence still mattered. The news spread quickly. The story of a small startup winning a major, prestigious project from a global conglomerate was a compelling one. Our phones began to ring. Suppliers we had worked with for years called to offer their support and favorable terms. Talented young architects and engineers at Artifacts Cresswell, disillusioned with the new leadership, began discreetly sending us their resumes. We were creating a center of gravity, drawing like-minded talent into our orbit. We leased a small office space in a developing neighborhood, an open-concept loft with exposed brick walls and abundant natural light. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. The day we moved in, setting up our computers, unrolling our drawings, and plugging in a new coffee machine, the feeling was incredible. We had gone from a desperate plan on my dining room table to a functioning architectural firm with one of the most significant projects in the city. The real work had just begun. We had to work harder than ever. We were a lean team on a massive project, with no room for error. Long days bled into long nights. Our office was filled with the smell of coffee, the click of keyboards, and the sound of intense, collaborative debate over design details. But no one complained. We were driven by a shared energy, a pride in building something from the ground up, on our own terms. One evening, about 2 months in, I was working late at the office, reviewing a set of structural drawings. The door opened and Robert Cresswell walked in. I hadn't seen him since the day I'd quit. He looked older, and there was a weariness in his walk. He looked around our small, bustling space, at the desks, the whiteboards covered in equations and sketches. "Leo," he said, his voice low and tinged with something that sounded like regret. "I hear you're doing well." "We're managing, Robert," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. He walked over to my desk and looked at the drawings for the biomedical facility. "This is the right design," he said quietly, almost to himself. "This is what should have been built." He looked at me, and in his clouded eyes, I saw a complex mixture of remorse and, perhaps, a sliver of pride. "I made a mistake, Leo. I was so focused on securing my financial legacy that I forgot about the real one. The real legacy is the work. It's you." I didn't know what to say. The anger I had held for him seemed to dissipate, leaving only a quiet sadness for what had been lost. "Do you need anything?" he asked. "Any help? Any advice?" "We'll be okay, Robert," I said. "But thank you." He nodded slowly, gave the office one last look, and walked out. Seeing him, so diminished, I realized I didn't need his apology anymore. His regret was his own burden to carry. We had already moved on. Vantage Collaborative wasn't built on the ruins of his firm. It was built on its best principles, the ones he had taught me and then forgotten. We had everything we needed to build our own legacy. 3 years passed. The frantic, caffeine-fueled energy of our startup phase at Vantage Collaborative settled into the confident, steady rhythm of a successful and respected firm. Our small loft office was a memory, replaced by 2 floors in a restored industrial building downtown. Our team had grown from 3 desperate partners around a dining room table to 35 talented architects, engineers, and support staff, including some of the best and brightest who had eventually left the hollowed-out shell of Artifacts Cresswell. Our portfolio, once consisting of a single crucial project, was now diverse and impressive. We had become the go-to firm in the city for complex, challenging projects that required not just vision, but a deep, unwavering competence. We had built a reputation on the very principles we had founded the company on. We turned down projects that felt wrong, that prioritized style over substance, or asked us to compromise our ethics for a bigger payday. Our brand wasn't built on flashy magazine covers. It was built on word of mouth from satisfied clients, on buildings that worked beautifully, and on a process that was collaborative and transparent. We were, in every sense, the antithesis of what our old firm had become. The final chapter of Artifacts Cresswell, Philadelphia, was written not with a bang, but with a quiet, ignominious whimper. I read about it in an industry trade journal one morning while sipping my coffee. The headline was simple: Artifacts Group to downsize Philadelphia operations following strategic review. The article detailed the steady decline of the studio since the acquisition. After losing the biomedical facility contract and a cascade of other long-term clients, they had failed to secure any new, significant work in the region. Julian Croft's tenure had been a short and costly failure. His few projects were plagued by budget overruns and design flaws that had led to lawsuits. He had quietly resigned a year ago to pursue a teaching fellowship in Europe. The article concluded that Artifacts would be folding the remaining staff into their New York office, effectively closing the doors on the legacy of Cresswell and Associates for good. I felt no sense of triumph, no vindictive pleasure. I felt only a quiet melancholy. It was a sad, inevitable end to a once great firm, a cautionary tale about what happens when a company loses its soul. That afternoon, my son Sam, now a newly minted graduate with a degree in civil engineering, was in the office. He was interning with us for the summer before starting his first real job, and Sarah had him working on the structural calculations for a new arts center. He walked over to my desk, a set of blueprints in his hand. "Dad, can you look at this?" he asked, pointing to a complex load-bearing junction. "I've run the numbers 3 times, and the shear stress seems too high with this beam specification. I think we need to upgrade to a W-flange beam here, even though it adds to the cost." I looked at his calculations. He was right. He had caught a subtle but critical detail that a less careful engineer might have missed. He had chosen integrity over ease. I felt a surge of pride so immense it almost took my breath away. It was a pride that dwarfed any professional award or accolade I had ever received. "You're absolutely right, Sam," I said, a wide smile spreading across my face. "That's a great catch. Go talk to Sarah about it. Tell her you're right, and I'm buying you dinner tonight at the best steakhouse in town." He grinned, his confidence buoyed. "Thanks, Dad." He walked over to Sarah's desk and I watched him go. This young man who was so full of potential and integrity. He was a builder, in the truest sense of the word. Later that evening, after our celebratory dinner, I stood at the large window of my office, looking out at the city skyline as the lights began to twinkle on. The city was a living tapestry of steel and glass, and I could see several of my own contributions woven into it: the solid, reassuring form of the hospital wing, the elegant lines of a new library, the bold but functional headquarters of a tech company. They were buildings that served a purpose, that housed people, that worked. They were a part of the city's story, and a part of mine. I thought about my journey, the bitter sting of betrayal, the fear of starting over, the immense risk, and the profound satisfaction of building something on my own terms. I realized the best revenge was never about watching my old firm fail. The best revenge was succeeding so completely on my own terms that their fate became irrelevant. It was about creating a place where good people could do good work and be respected for it. It was about building a company that my son could be proud to work for. The blueprint I had drafted at my kitchen table years ago wasn't just for a business, it was for a life. A life built not on the empty promises of others, but on my own 2 hands and a set of unwavering principles. The view from this office, the skyline I had helped to shape, was more than just a view. It was a testament. It was the quiet, solid, and deeply satisfying proof that the most important thing an architect can ever build is his own foundation. And from this vantage point, the future looked beautifully, enduringly strong.